Just sign here, Mom. My son's finger landed on the dotted line like it owned the room. Across from him, Brooke sat too close in that way that isn't affection, but pressure. Her perfume was sharp and expensive, cutting right through the scent of my lemon polish and old pinewood furniture. And beside her, the man in the suit opened his leather briefcase with a soft click, like we were about to perform a magic trick. Only this kind of trick steals your life. Mrs. Suzanne, he said smoothly, already holding a stamp in one hand and a pen in the other, gold-plated heavy, the kind of pen meant to make you feel like you're signing something important, when really, you're signing something final. Brooke smiled at me with teeth, but no warmth. We're making things easier for you. You should be grateful. Grateful. My hands were folded tight in my lap, knuckles aching. I kept my face calm the way my late husband taught me. Never show fear to people who feed on it. But my heartbeat was loud in my ears, and my throat had that dry, papery feeling it gets when you're trying not to cry. Matthew cleared his throat. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. Mom, it's just paperwork. You said you didn't want to worry anymore. I hadn't said that, not once, but I let the silence sit there. Anyway, thick and sticky, because sometimes silence is a shield, and sometimes it's a trap you lay very carefully. Read it to me, I said softly, like a confused old woman who needed help. I even tilted my head the way I'd seen women do at the pharmacy counter. When the young cashier spoke too fast, Brooke's smile tightened. There's no need. Paul is a notary. It's standard. Humor me, I said. The notary glanced at Brooke. A quick look faster than a blink, but I saw it. I saw the way people look when they're annoyed the prey is speaking. He opened the document. This authorizes. Slower, I whispered. Matthew exhaled, frustration slipping through his polite voice. Mom, why are you doing this? Because the living room felt different today. Because my own couchware, I used to hold him during thunderstorms, felt like a courtroom bench. Because Brooke's folder was thick with pages that smelled like printer ink and bad intentions. Because nobody brings a notary to help unless they need something you can't take back. And because for months now, I'd been hearing little things. Little dismissals, little laughs, little we know better than you, comments dressed up as concern. I reached for the pen, my fingers wrapped around it. The room went still. Brooke leaned in, her voice almost tender. Good, that's it. Just sign and everything will be taken care of. Taken care of? I stared at the dotted line. And all I could think was how quickly a life can be erased with one stroke. I lifted the pen slowly, deliberately, and the doorbell rang. Not a polite little ding, either. A long, firm press, like someone outside already knew what was happening inside. Paul snapped his head toward the door. Brooke's eyes flashed with irritation so sharp it could have cut glass. Matthew whispered, "Who is that?" I set the pen down, very carefully, and stood. My heart wasn't pounding from fear anymore. It was pounding because the moment had arrived. I walked toward the door, and as I reached for the handle, I smiled. Because whoever was on the other side, they were right on time. And the second I opened that door, Brooke's face changed like she'd just seen a ghost. When I opened the door, cold air spilled in, smelling like wet pavement and winter moss. For one blinking second, my porch looked empty, just gray Seattle light. The bare branches of the maple tree. My welcome mat curled at the corner. Then I saw her. Rachel stood there with her shoulders squared, hair tucked neatly into her scarf, and that look in her eyes I'd seen once before, 40 years ago, when a man at the grocery store tried to snatch her purse and she grabbed his wrist like she was wringing out a towel. Behind her stood a man in a dark coat holding a slim folder to his chest, calm as a priest at a funeral. And next to him, another man, younger, carrying a small camera bag like it weighed nothing at all. Rachel's smile was bright, too bright. "Oh, Suzanne," she said, projecting cheer like a shield. Hope we're not interrupting. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her. Really looked. The way you look when you need to confirm the ground beneath your feet is solid. And she gave me the smallest nod, barely. A movement like a quiet promise. You're not alone. Come in, I said, stepping aside. The living room went silent the moment they crossed the threshold. Brooke was the first to stand, lips parting as if she'd forgotten how to speak. Her posture stayed poised, but the color drained out of her face so fast it was almost fascinating. Like watching a mask crack. Matthew's eyes widened. Rachel, Paul the notary stiffened, clutching his briefcase. His polite expression didn't falter, but his pupils shifted, quick and darting, like an animal deciding which exit was safest. The man with the folder walked forward and offered his hand to me first. Mrs. Suzanne, he said, voice steady, professional. Robert Hayes. Then he turned, just slightly, to the younger man. And this is Daniel Harris. Daniel Harris gave a small nod, eyes scanning the room. Not curious eyes. Observant eyes. The kind that notice how close Brooke was sitting to me, how the papers were spread like cards, how the pen was already placed in my reach. Rachel drifted to my side like she belonged there, which she did. More than anyone in this room who shared my last name. Brooke recovered quickly. She always did. Oh, she laughed lightly, as if we were all simply guests at a dinner party. This is unexpected. Suzanne, we were just helping you with some paperwork. Paperwork. It was the way she said it that made my stomach tighten. Like it was a harmless word. Like signing your life away could be tucked into a cute little box labeled *paperwork* and tied with a bow. Mr. Hayes didn't smile back. He set his folder on the coffee table. My coffee table. With the ring mark from the mug my husband used to drink from every morning. And opened it with careful hands. I'm here because Mrs. Suzanne requested independent counsel, he said, and because she was concerned about being pressured to sign documents without adequate review. Matthew blinked. Mom, what is this? I watched him as he spoke. I watched his mouth form the word mom like it still meant something solid. Like it wasn't just a label now. A piece of furniture you move when it's in the way. I'm making sure I understand what I'm signing, I said gently. Brooke's tone sharpened. Suzanne, you're being dramatic. Rachel's fingers pressed lightly into my forearm. A reminder. Breathe. Daniel Harris set his camera bag down and pulled out a small device. With Mrs. Suzanne's consent, I'll be recording this meeting. Paul's face flickered just a twitch, but it was there. He cleared his throat. I'm just the notary. I'm not involved in. Then you won't mind transparency, Mr. Hayes said smoothly. Brooke's nails tapped once against the folder in front of her. A tiny sound. But I heard it the way you hear a rattlesnake. Matthew finally looked at me really. And there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Fear. Not fear for me. Fear of what I might say. Mom, he whispered, voice low. Why did you call a lawyer? My throat tightened, but I didn't let my voice shake. Not yet. Because I've been listening, I said. And I've been learning. Brooke let out a short, humorless laugh. Learning what, exactly? I looked at the documents on my table, the gold pen still resting where my hand had been, the dotted lines waiting like open mouths. Then I looked back at Brooke, and I realized something so clear it almost made me dizzy. She wasn't worried about my well-being. She was worried about my silence, because silence is only useful until the wrong person starts asking questions. Mr. Hayes slid one page forward and the title at the top made my breath catch. Authorization of Financial Control. The words at the top of the page looked harmless enough. Clean font. Crisp margins. The kind of document that pretends to be neutral. Authorization of Financial Control. Mr. Hayes didn't touch it right away. He let it sit there between us. Like a snake, you don't poke until you're sure where its head is. This document, he said calmly, would grant decision-making authority over Mrs. Suzanne's assets to third parties. Brooke leaned back, crossing her legs with practiced elegance. That's not what it means. It's simply a safeguard. A safeguard for whom? Rachel asked. The question landed heavy. Matthew swallowed. Mom, it's just so we can help you. You've been overwhelmed lately. I studied my son's facial lines at the corners of his eyes. I used to kiss when he was little. The mouth that once begged me not to turn off the hallway light at night. I tried to trace the moment when concern had turned into strategy. Overwhelmed, how? I asked softly. He hesitated, and in that hesitation, I heard the echo of someone else's voice. Brooke's voice, rehearsed, prepared. Well, you live alone. You forget things sometimes. I felt something sharp twist in my chest. I forgot your birthday once, I said. After I'd been up all night at the hospital with your father. Matthew's face flushed. That's not what I meant. Brooke jumped in smoothly. No one is blaming you, Suzanne. Aging is natural. Aging. She said it the way some people say rust. Mr. Hayes finally picked up the page. He adjusted his glasses, eyes scanning quickly. This clause, he said, tapping the paper, would allow the appointed parties to sell property on your behalf without requiring further consent. Matthew frowned. That's just in case. In case of what? Rachel cut in. In case she's not capable later, Brooke said, too quickly. The room went very still. Daniel Harris's pen scratched quietly against his notebook. I folded my hands together. They weren't shaking. That surprised me. So, I said slowly, this paper lets you sell my house. Brooke smiled, a patient, patronizing curve of the lips. If it becomes necessary. And who decides when it's necessary? Well, she shrugged lightly. We would. There it was. Clean, clear, unashamed. I looked around my living room. The framed school photo on the shelf. The dent in the wall where Matthew's bike once crashed. The rug my husband and I bought the year we thought we might finally travel more. All of it reduced to liquid assets in someone else's mouth. Matthew rubbed his forehead. Mom, you're making this sound worse than it is. No, I said. I'm hearing it clearly for the first time. Brooke's eyes hardened. You're being emotional. I smiled at that. A slow, knowing smile. When men get angry, they're decisive, I said. When women defend themselves, we're emotional. Mr. Hayes glanced at me, a flicker of approval crossing his face. Mrs. Suzanne, he said gently, has full legal capacity. Any attempt to imply otherwise without medical evaluation is problematic. Paul shifted in his seat. Let's all calm down. These documents are standard practice. Daniel Harris looked up. Standard for whom? Paul's mouth opened, closed. I could feel something changing not just in the room, but inside me. A tightening, a straightening. Like a spine remembering its job. Matthew, I said quietly. Did you read these papers? He hesitated again. Brooke explained them, he said. Of course, she did. I stood then, slowly, deliberately, the way my mother taught me to stand when I had something important to say. I raised you to ask questions, I told him. Not to hand your conscience to the loudest voice in the room. His eyes filled, and for a moment, I almost reached for him. Almost, but Brooke stood too. This is getting ridiculous, she snapped. We came here to help, not to be interrogated. I met her gaze, steady and calm. Help doesn't rush, I said. Help doesn't bring a notary unannounced. And help doesn't ask for control. The word hung there. Control. Daniel Harris clicked on the recorder. Mrs. Suzanne, he said. Could you explain how this meeting came to be arranged? I opened my mouth to answer. And suddenly, my mind flashed back to flour-dusted hands. A warm kitchen, and the day my son told me he was getting married. To the moment I first felt myself shrinking, I took a breath. To explain that, I said, we have to go back. Because this didn't start with paperwork, it started with a smile at my kitchen table. That felt just a little too cold. I was kneading dough when Matthew told me the kitchen was warm, the kind of warmth that settles into your bones. Yeast and flour clung to my fingers, and the radio hummed low in the corner. An old love song I hadn't heard in years. My hands moved the way they always had, confident, grounded in decades of feeding people I loved. "Mom," he said from the doorway, "I want you to really understand something before the wedding." I looked up, smiling without thinking. "Of course, sweetheart." He stepped closer, hands tucked into his pockets like he was 16 again and asking for the car keys. "Brooke is different. At the time, the word felt hopeful, new, like the beginning of a chapter. "I know," I said lightly, wiping my hands on my apron. "I can't wait to meet her properly." Matthew smiled, relieved. "She's very particular." That should have been my first clue. I spent the whole afternoon planning that dinner. I drove across town to pick the freshest shrimp, pressed avocados gently like I was testing peaches for a baby's first bite. I stayed up late, my feet swollen, humming to myself as the house filled with familiar chowder thick with cream, cornbread golden at the edges, apples simmering with cinnamon. Food has always been my language. When the doorbell rang the next evening, my heart lifted. I smoothed my pink dress, checked my lipstick in the hallway mirror, and opened the door with my arms already halfway open. "Brooke," I said warmly, "it's so nice to finally meet you." She didn't step into the hug. She touched my shoulder with 2 fingers, smiled like someone completing a task. "Nice to meet you, ma'am." "Ma'am." Her heels clicked sharply against my floor as she walked in, eyes sweeping my living room in quick, measuring glances. I told myself not to imagine things. I told myself everyone is nervous meeting a future mom. At dinner, I tried. Lord knows I tried. "What do you do for work?" I asked. "Office," she said. "Do you like to cook?" "No." "Do you and Matthew have plans for the honeymoon?" "Maybe." Each word landed like ice. She pushed the food around her plate, separating ingredients as if they might contaminate one another. When she tasted the chowder, her nose wrinkled just slightly, not enough for Matthew to notice, but enough for me to feel. "I don't really eat homemade food," she said casually. "I prefer proper restaurants." Proper? The word sat there like a verdict. Matthew jumped in quickly. "Mom's food is amazing," he said, a little too loud. Brooke smiled at him, indulgent. At me, dismissive. In that moment, something shifted inside my chest, not a break. Exactly, but a quiet folding, like a piece of paper creased just enough that it would never quite lie flat again. The weeks that followed were full of small things. She sat on the edge of my couch like it might stain her. She scrolled through her phone while I spoke. Once, while I poured coffee, she said lightly, "You'll enjoy having more time to yourself after the wedding, right?" More time for myself. As if I were a phase being outgrown. Wedding planning was worse. Decisions made without me. My offers brushed aside. When I suggested baking the cake, a tradition my mother had passed down to me, she laughed. "Oh no," she said. "I don't want anything homemade." That night, I cried alone in the kitchen, clutching the old apron my mother gave me. The fabric smelled faintly of sugar and memory. By the time the wedding arrived, I already felt like a guest in my own son's life. Seated far back, introduced without my name, cut off mid-toast with polite applause. And when I walked to my car alone, I heard Brooke whisper, "Good thing she lives far away." That was the night I understood. I wasn't being pushed aside by accident. I was being managed. And a week later, she came to my door with a notary. The knock came mid-morning, the kind of knock that assumes it will be answered. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Confident. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door to find Brooke standing there in a cream-colored coat, hair perfectly smoothed, smile already in place. Beside her stood a man I didn't recognize, tall, neat, holding a leather briefcase like it was an extension of his arm. "Good morning, Mom," Brooke said brightly. "This is Paul. He's a notary." Notary. The word landed like a dropped plate. "We're here to help you with some house paperwork," she added, as if that explained everything. Behind my smile, my heart began to race. Not because I was confused, but because I understood. I understood far more than she realized. "Oh," I said mildly, stepping aside. "That's thoughtful." Paul nodded politely. "We won't take much of your time." They sat at my kitchen table. The same table where Matthew once did homework, where birthday candles melted into waxy puddles year after year. Brooke opened her folder with practice deficiency. "We've been worried about you," she said. "Living alone can be a lot at your age." My age? It was said softly, kindly, like concern. But concern doesn't bring paperwork. Concern asks questions first. Paul slid a document toward me. "Just a preliminary review." I didn't touch it. "I'd like to read it later," I said. "Perhaps after I speak with my son." Brooke's smile tightened, just a hair. "Of course. We just thought we'd get ahead of things." Ahead of things. I served them tea. I asked Paul how long he'd been a notary. I listened. I watched. And when they left, taking their papers with them, I stood in my kitchen long after the door closed, feeling the echo of something cold passing through my home. That afternoon, I pulled the safe from the back of my closet. I hadn't opened it since my husband passed. Inside were documents I'd avoided, not because they frightened me, but because they made the grief too real. I sorted through them slowly, methodically, and then I saw it. An envelope, thick and sealed. The ranch. 500 acres in eastern Washington. Farmland, cattle, a main house and 3 smaller ones. Appraised. Profitable. Mine. My husband's last gift. As I read the deed, something settled inside me. A calm I hadn't felt in months. Power isn't loud. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, waiting. I put the documents back carefully and closed the safe. I told no one. Not Matthew. Certainly not Brooke. That week, the phone calls started. "Have you thought about downsizing?" Brooke asked sweetly. "This house must be a lot for you." We could help manage the money, she offered. Every word was velvet-trapped pressure. When Matthew came by, keys jangling nervously in his hand, I knew the script wasn't his. "Brooke and I have been talking about your future," he said. "My future." I nodded. I listened. I said nothing. That night, I called Rachel. And for the first time, I said the words out loud. "I think they're planning something." Rachel didn't hesitate. "Then tomorrow," she said firmly, "we get you protection." Because silence had kept me safe. But soon, I would need witnesses. The knock came mid-morning, the kind of knock that assumes it will be answered. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Confident. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door to find Brooke standing there in a cream-colored coat, hair perfectly smoothed, smile already in place. Beside her stood a man I didn't recognize, tall, neat, holding a leather briefcase like it was an extension of his arm. "Good morning, Mom," Brooke said brightly. "This is Paul. He's a notary." Notary. The word landed like a dropped plate. "We're here to help you with some house paperwork," she added. As if that explained everything. Behind my smile, my heart began to race. Not because I was confused, but because I understood. I understood far more than she realized. "Oh," I said mildly, stepping aside. "That's thoughtful." Paul nodded politely. "We won't take much of your time." They sat at my kitchen table. The same table where Matthew once did homework. Where birthday candles melted into waxy puddles year after year. Brooke opened her folder with practice deficiency. "We've been worried about you," she said. "Living alone can be a lot at your age." My age? It was said softly, kindly, like concern. But concern doesn't bring paperwork. Concern asks questions first. Paul slid a document toward me. Just a preliminary review. I didn't touch it. I'd like to read it later, I said. Perhaps after I speak with my son. Brooke's smile tightened, just a hair. Of course. We just thought we'd get ahead of things. Ahead of things. I served them tea. I asked Paul how long he'd been a notary. I listened. I watched. And when they left, taking their papers with them, I stood in my kitchen long after the door closed, feeling the echo of something cold passing through my home. That afternoon, I pulled the safe from the back of my closet. I hadn't opened it since my husband passed. Inside were documents I'd avoided, not because they frightened me, but because they made the grief too real. I sorted through them slowly, methodically. And then I saw it. An envelope, thick and sealed. The ranch, 500 acres in eastern Washington, farmland, cattle, a main house, and 3 smaller ones. Appraised, profitable mine. My husband's last gift. As I read the deed, something settled inside me. A calm I hadn't felt in months. Power isn't loud. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, waiting. I put the documents back carefully and closed the safe. I told no one. Not Matthew. Certainly not Brooke. That week, the phone calls started. Have you thought about downsizing? Brooke asked sweetly. This house must be a lot for you, she cooed. We could help manage the money, she offered. Every word was velvet-trapped pressure. When Matthew came by, keys jangling nervously in his hand, I knew the script wasn't his. Brooke and I have been talking about your future, he said. My future. I nodded. I listened. I said nothing. That night, I called Rachel. And for the first time, I said the words out loud. I think they're planning something. Rachel didn't hesitate. Then tomorrow, she said firmly, we get you protection. Because silence had kept me safe, but soon, I would need witnesses. Rachel picked me up the next morning before I could talk myself out of it. She didn't ask if I was sure. She didn't soften her voice or pat my hand, the way people do when they think you're fragile. She just showed up in her old blue sedan, leaned across the passenger seat, and said, "Get in. We're not letting anyone corner you again." The drive downtown was quiet at first. Rain traced slow lines down the windshield, blurring the city into gray watercolor. I watched familiar streets pass by, thinking about how many times I'd driven Matthew to school along these same roads. How safe I'd felt back then, how unquestioned my place in his life had been. You know, I said finally, staring straight ahead, I keep wondering when I stopped being the mother and started being the problem. Rachel snorted softly. About the same moment you stopped being useful to someone. Her bluntness stung, but it also steadied me. The lawyer's office smelled like polished wood and old books. Mr. Robert? Hayes rose when we entered, his handshake firm, his eyes sharp in a way that made me feel seen rather than examined. Mrs. Suzanne, he said after listening quietly to my story. What you're describing is not confusion. It's a pattern. He spread my documents across his desk like puzzle pieces. My house. My accounts. My will. The ranch papers I'd finally brought out into the light. They isolate first, he continued. Then they undermine confidence. Then they present themselves as the solution. Rachel squeezed my hand. And the notary? I asked. Hayes's mouth tightened. That's usually the final step. Friendly witness. Quick signatures. No time for reflection. A chill crept up my spine. So what do? I asked. For now, he said calmly, you do nothing. You sign nothing. And you let them reveal themselves. He explained trusts, safeguards, documentation, recording conversations. I listened carefully, not as a frightened old woman, but as someone learning a new language, the language of boundaries. When we left his office, the rain had stopped. The air felt cleaner, lighter. That afternoon, I watered my garden and tried to pretend my life was ordinary again. But every sound made me tense. Every passing car. And then Matthew's car pulled into the driveway. He wasn't alone. Brooke stepped out first, folder tucked under her arm like it belonged there. She waved as if this were a friendly visit, as if we hadn't crossed some invisible line weeks ago. "Hi, Mom," Matthew said, forcing a smile. I invited them in, offered tea, sat across from them in my living room, my recorder hidden in my apron pocket, my lawyer's words echoing in my head. "Mom," Matthew began, voice oddly formal, "we're worried about you." Brooke opened her folder. They talked about safety, about responsibility, about assisted living and peace of mind. They talked as if I weren't sitting right there. When Brooke said, "We'll handle the finances," I felt something inside me go still. Not fear. Resolve. "I need time to think," I said quietly. They exchanged that look, the one I'd learned to recognize. "Of course," Matthew said, standing. "But don't wait too long." After they left, my hands shook not from age, but from anger held too tightly. That night, I barely slept. The next day, Brooke called. "Have you decided?" she asked sweetly. "Yes," I said. "Come by tomorrow. Bring everything." I hung up before she could respond, because if silence had been my shield before, now it was bait. And when they came back with the notary, they had no idea the room was no longer theirs to control. They arrived right on time. Brooke always did. Precision was part of her performance. Her heels clicked against my porch like punctuation marks, each one announcing confidence, certainty, ownership. Paul followed, briefcase in hand, smile practiced and ready. Matthew trailed behind them, shoulders tense, eyes already apologizing for something he didn't yet have the courage to name. I welcomed them in with the same politeness I'd used my whole life. That was the mistake they made. They thought politeness meant permission. We sat in the living room again. The same couch, the same coffee table, but the air was different, now charged, alert. I slipped the recorder deeper into my apron pocket and folded my hands. Brooke didn't waste time. "We brought everything," she said, opening her folder with a decisive snap. "We simplified it for you." Simplified. Paul laid out the papers, like offerings, deeds, authorizations, transfers. His pen followed, placed gently within my reach, angled just right. "Mrs. Suzanne," he said smoothly, "once you sign, we'll take care of the rest. Take care." Matthew hovered at my side. "Mom, this will really help. You won't have to worry anymore." I looked up at my son. "When did I start worrying so much?" I asked softly. He blinked. "Well, lately." "Lately," I repeated. "Or since someone told you I should." Brooke cut in quickly. "Suzanne, let's not make this emotional." I smiled at that. A small smile. "Private, then let's make it clear," I said. "Read it aloud." Paul hesitated. "For the record," I added gently. His jaw tightened, but he complied. Reading clauses that stripped me down sentence by sentence. Sell the house. Transfer proceeds. Grant authority. Relocate if deemed necessary. Necessary by whom? I asked again. "By us," Brooke said, impatient now. "For your safety." Safety. That word had been used so often lately it had lost all meaning. I picked up the pen. The room leaned forward. I let my hand tremble just enough to encourage them. Then the doorbell rang. Not once, twice. Firm. Brooke turned sharply. "Were you expecting someone?" "Yes," I said, standing slowly. I was. When I opened the door, Rachel stood there steady, solid, exactly where she belonged. Mr. Hayes was beside her, calm as ever. And behind them, Daniel Harris lifted his camera. "Good afternoon, Suzanne," Rachel said warmly. "Hope we're not late?" Brooke's face drained of color. Paul froze. Matthew's mouth fell open. "Mom." Mr. Hayes stepped inside, surveying the documents on the table with professional interest. "I'm Robert Hayes, legal counsel for Mrs. Suzanne. I'll be supervising this meeting." Daniel Harris raised the camera. "And I'll be recording." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Paul snapped his briefcase shut. There's been a misunderstanding. Sit, Mr. Hayes said calmly. Paul sat. Brooke tried to smile. Failed. I returned to my chair, my spine straighter than it had been in years. I was just about to sign, I said lightly, but I thought it best to have witnesses. Daniel Harris looked directly at me. Mrs. Suzanne, can you tell us what you were being asked to sign today? I took a breath, and for the first time, I didn't soften my words, because the moment I began to speak, everything they'd planned started to collapse. I was asked to sign away my house. The words came out steady, clear, stronger than I expected. Daniel Harris's pen paused midair. Brooke let out a sharp laugh, too loud, too fast. That's not Suzanne, you're misunderstanding. No, I said, turning to face her fully for the first time. I understand perfectly. Matthew looked between us, his face pale. Mom, that's not how it was meant. Then explain it, I said gently. Explain why the document says my property can be sold without my consent. Mr. Hayes slid the page closer to Daniel Harris. Klaus 42. Daniel read silently, then nodded once. Paul shifted in his chair. These are standard elder planning documents. For whom? Daniel asked. Paul's mouth opened, closed. I continued, my voice growing steadier with each sentence. I was also asked to transfer all proceeds into an account managed by my son and his wife. And I paused. Letting the silence work for me, I was encouraged to consider assisted living. Despite being medically and cognitively sound, Matthew whispered, Mom, we were just worried. I turned to him, and my heart cracked just enough to let honesty through. Worried people ask questions, I said. They don't arrive with answers already printed. Brooke stood abruptly. This is outrageous. You're making us look like villains. Rachel spoke for the first time, her voice calm but unyielding. You did that yourself. Daniel Harris adjusted the camera. Mrs. Suzanne, did you feel pressured to sign today? Yes, I said. Very much so. Paul stood. I think I should leave. Mr. Hayes raised a hand. Please don't. This is precisely when we need clarity. Brooke's composure finally cracked. Fine, she snapped. Yes, we wanted to simplify things. She's old. Things happen. Falls, confusion. Someone has to be responsible. Old? The word echoed. I felt it then, not sadness, not anger, but something clean and sharp. Respect for myself. I rose from my chair and walked to the hallway closet. When I returned, I carried the small metal safe in both hands and set it gently on the table. Everyone stared. I opened it. The rustle of paper sounded louder than thunder. I was quiet, I said, because I was watching. I laid out the deed. The appraisal, the maps. 500 acres of land. Daniel Harris leaned forward. Mr. Hayes smiled faintly. Brooke's face went slack. Matthew stared. What is that? My husband's legacy, I said. And my future. Mr. Hayes cleared his throat. The ranch's most recent valuation places it well into the 8-figure range. The room stopped breathing. Paul's knees buckled slightly as he sat back down. Brooke whispered, You never told us. I met her gaze. You never asked what I wanted. You only asked what I had. Daniel Harris closed his notebook. This meeting is concluded. Further attempts to coerce or misrepresent will be handled formally. Paul fled. Brooke followed. Fury and humiliation tangled on her face. Matthew stayed. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, Mom, I didn't know. I nodded once. That, I said, is something you'll have to live with. But the real reckoning didn't happen that day. It came in the weeks that followed. When silence was replaced by consequences, after they left, the house felt strangely quiet, too quiet. Like the air after a storm when you're waiting to see what's been damaged. Rachel stayed. She always does when something important breaks. She made tea without asking. The way only someone who truly knows you can. Chamomile, honey, the mug with the tiny crack on the rim, I never throw away. We sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around warmth, neither of us rushing to fill the silence. You were magnificent, she said finally. I shook my head slowly. I was terrified. She smiled at me. So is everyone who does something brave for the first time. That night, I slept for 12 hours straight. No dreams, no tossing, just rest, deep and heavy, like my body finally believed I was safe. The next morning, reality returned in pieces. 3 missed calls from Brooke. 1 text from Matthew. Can we talk? I didn't answer either. Instead, I walked through my house my house and touched things deliberately. The doorframe where Matthew's height was marked in pencil. The kitchen drawer where my husband kept his ridiculous collection of takeout menus. The couch cushion worn thin from years of shared evenings. I wasn't sentimental. I was grounding myself. Mr. Hayes called later that afternoon. His voice was calm, efficient. We've documented everything. The recording was very helpful. Will there be consequences? I asked. Yes, he said simply, but they won't be dramatic. That surprised me. People think justice is loud, he continued. It isn't. It's procedural. Procedural sounded boring, but boring is exactly what terrifies people who rely on manipulation. Paul, the notary, lost his license within weeks. Quietly, no headlines, just a letter and a sealed decision. Brooke stopped calling after her. Attorney sent 1 carefully worded email, requesting clarification, and receiving a very firm response in return. Matthew came by alone on a Sunday afternoon. No folder, no rehearsed lines. Just him. He stood awkwardly in the doorway like a boy who'd stayed out too late. Can I come in? He asked. I stepped aside. We sat in the living room again, but this time, he chose the chair across from me, not beside me. A small thing. A respectful thing. I didn't see it, he said. I swear I didn't. I know, I replied. That surprised him. But I also know, I continued, that not seeing is sometimes a choice. His eyes filled. He nodded. I don't know how to fix this, he whispered. I folded my hands in my lap. You don't fix it with words. You fix it with time. With distance from anyone who asks you to trade your integrity for comfort. He didn't argue. That mattered. Weeks passed. Brooke moved out. The divorce followed quietly, like a curtain closing at the end of a bad play. I wasn't named. My assets were untouched. My peace returned in layers. On my 70th birthday, I didn't throw a party. I packed a small suitcase. Because I was finally ready to go see the land. My husband had trusted me with the land that would change everything. And when I stood on that ranch for the first time, I understood why this fight had been necessary. The first thing I noticed wasn't the size. It was the quiet. A kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, but full. Wind moving through tall grass. Distant lowing of cattle. The soft, steady rhythm of a place that has existed long before anyone tried to take anything from me. I stood at the edge of the porch of the main house, my suitcase still unopened at my feet, and let the land breathe around me. 500 acres stretched out in every direction, gold and green and endless. This was what my husband had protected. This was what he trusted me with. I walked slowly, my boots crunching against gravel, touching the weathered railing, the doorframe smoothed by decades of hands. Every structure had a purpose. Every fence line made sense. Nothing here was decorative. Everything mattered. That night, sitting on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders, I watched the sun sink low and turn the fields orange. And something inside me, something old and tired, finally loosened its grip. I hadn't lost my son. I had lost my place in his life. And now, I was reclaiming it elsewhere. In the weeks that followed, I came back often. I met the workers, learned the rhythms, asked questions. I didn't pretend to know everything, but I also didn't pretend to be helpless. One afternoon, a woman named Margaret arrived. She was 73, small, carrying a single suitcase and a story that felt painfully familiar. Her children had convinced a court she couldn't manage her affairs. They held her penchant for safety. She hadn't been alone in months. I poured her tea. I listened. And I realized something important. This land didn't just represent independence. It represented capacity. The ability to create something useful out of what had nearly broken me. By spring, the main house had changed. Not in luxury, but in purpose. One guest room became a quiet office. Another became a place where women could stay safely while they figured out their next steps. Rachel moved into one of the smaller houses, not as help, not as charity, but as family. Together, we built something steady, practical, quietly powerful. Matthew visited, alone, weekly. He didn't rush forgiveness. He earned small pieces of trust. One evening, walking the fence line, he stopped and said, "I don't know why I let someone convince me you were fragile." I stopped too. "Because you forgot who raised you." He nodded. He didn't argue. That mattered. The calls started coming. Letters, referrals. Women who had been told they were too old, too slow, too inconvenient. They left lighter, stronger. When people ask me now what changed, I don't talk about the money. I talk about the moment I stopped explaining myself. Because the final truth wasn't about inheritance. It was about boundaries. People think boundaries are loud things. They imagine slammed doors, raised voices, ultimatums delivered with shaking hands. But real boundaries, the kind that hold, are often quiet. They don't beg to be understood. They don't argue their case. They simply exist. I learned that slowly, the way you learn the weight of your own body after being carried for too long. On the ranch, mornings came early. I'd wake before the sun, wrap my hands around a warm mug, and step outside while the world was still deciding what it would become that day. The air smelled like soil and grass, and something honest. Nothing here pretended to be gentle while sharpening a knife behind its back. One morning, Margaret joined me on the porch. She was stronger now, shoulders back, voice steadier. But there were still moments when the old fear flickered behind her eyes. "They called again," she said quietly. "My daughter. She says I'm being manipulated." I nodded. "They always say that when they lose control." Margaret looked out at the fields. "I used to think setting limits meant losing my children." I sipped my coffee. "Sometimes it means losing the version of them that only loved you when you were compliant." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I wish someone had told me earlier that love and obedience aren't the same thing." I didn't answer right away, because I was thinking about Matthew. He still came every Sunday. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we didn't. He fixed a fence once without being asked. Another time, he cooked dinner and burned the chicken, and we laughed like we used to. But I noticed something important. He stopped asking for forgiveness. He started showing up differently instead. He never brought Brooke's name into the house again. Never defended her. Never asked me to understand her perspective. That, more than any apology, told me he was learning. One afternoon, as we walked past the barns, he said, "I thought being a good son meant keeping the peace. And now," I asked, "and now I think it means protecting the people who protected me first." I stopped walking. That was new. That was earned. Back in Seattle, the house remained mine. I didn't sell it. I didn't justify keeping it. I simply kept it. The neighbors waved like they always had. The maple tree still dropped its leaves every fall. Nothing dramatic happened. And that, I realized, was the point. The world doesn't collapse when you stop it adjusts. Brooke never contacted me again. Through mutual whispers, I heard she'd told people I was difficult, controlling, ungrateful. I smiled when I heard that. Those are the names. People give women who no longer cooperate with their own erasure. At night, when the ranch was quiet, I sometimes thought about the woman I'd been at 69. Apologetic, grateful for scraps of attention. I didn't hate her. I thanked her. She survived long enough for me to arrive. And in the end, the lesson wasn't about money. It was about the moment I chose myself without asking permission. They say old age is the closing chapter. I disagree. I think it's the chapter where you finally stop lying to others and to yourself. On the morning I turned 70, I didn't wake up with dread or nostalgia. I woke up with clarity. Sunlight poured through the ranch kitchen windows. Dust dancing in the air like it had somewhere important to be. Rachel was already up, humming off-key while making coffee, the way she always does when she's content. "Happy birthday, revolutionary," she said, sliding a mug toward me. I laughed. If only my mother could hear that. "She'd be proud," Rachel said, without hesitation. Later that day, women arrived. Some by car, some by bus, some with just a purse and a story that needed to be told before it crushed them. We sat in a circle, no podiums, no speeches, just listening. One woman spoke about her son taking her credit cards for safekeeping. Another whispered about being told she was forgetful when she wasn't. Another cried because no one had asked what she wanted in years. I didn't give advice. I gave truth. You don't need permission to say no. Love doesn't require you to disappear. Help that costs your autonomy isn't help. They wrote those words down like lifelines. Matthew came that evening. He brought a small cake, slightly lopsided, and set it on the table like an offering. "I didn't bake," he said sheepishly. I smiled. "That's all right." We walked together after sunset, the land glowing softly around us. "I'm learning," he said. Slowly. "I know," I replied. "That's how learning lasts." He stopped near the fence and looked at me, not past me, not around me. "At the house," he said, "I watched you stand up, and I realized something." "What's that?" "You weren't becoming someone else," he said. "You were becoming more yourself." Tears stung my eyes, not from sadness, but from recognition. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone on the porch. Crickets sang. The stars spread themselves generously across the sky. I thought about my husband, about his last words, about how right he'd been. I had more than I believed, not just land or security but voice, choice, time. If I could speak to the woman I was months ago, I wouldn't warn her. I'd tell her this: you're not late. You're right on time, because dignity doesn't expire, and neither does courage. Sometimes the strongest chapter of a woman's life doesn't begin with youth but with the moment she finally says, "This life is mine." People sometimes ask me when it ended the conflict. The fear, the ache of betrayal. I tell them it didn't end. It transformed. Because stories like mine don't close with a neat bow. They keep breathing. They keep teaching. On quiet evenings now, I sit on the porch with my hands wrapped around a warm cup and think about that woman I was, the one who mistook endurance for love, silence for peace, sacrifice for duty. I don't judge her. I honor her. She did what she knew how to do at the time. But I also thank her for stepping aside when it was time for someone stronger to take the lead. Matthew still comes every Sunday. Sometimes we talk about the past. Sometimes we don't. He no longer asks for reassurance. He brings actions instead, fixing gates, listening more than speaking, showing up without an agenda. Trust, I've learned, returns on foot, not on horseback, slowly, carefully, one step at a time. As for me, I no longer explain my decisions to people who benefit from my doubt. That alone has changed everything. The ranch has grown into something I never planned, but somehow always needed. Women come here carrying stories heavy with shame that was never theirs to begin with. They arrive bent, apologetic, whispering their needs as if they're inconveniences. They leave standing taller. Not because I saved them, but because I reminded them of something they'd forgotten. That autonomy is not a privilege, it's a right. When I speak at community meetings now, I don't raise my voice. I don't dramatize. I simply say the truth plainly. If help requires your silence, it isn't help. If love demands control, it isn't love. And if someone tells you it's too late to change your life, walk away from them. Some people nod. Some look uncomfortable. That's how I know the message is landing where it needs to. At night, when the land settles and the stars stretch wide above me, I feel my husband's presence not as grief, but as grounding. I finally understand what he meant all those years ago. Strength isn't loud. Wisdom isn't rushed. And dignity is never something you age out of. My name is Suzanne. I am 70 years old. I am not invisible. I am not disposable. I am not done. And if there's one thing I hope someone carries with them from my story, it's this. You don't need to wait for permission to reclaim your life. Not from your children. Not from society. Not from fear. The moment you stand up straight and name what you deserve, that is the moment everything changes. This life is mine.